There is a cold that lives in old stone. It doesn't come from the wind, and a fire won't chase it out. It waits in the walls, and at Greywater Abbey, as one man learned on his first night there, it waits in the floor as well. Good evening. Let me introduce myself before I take you up onto that moor. I'm the one who tells these stories. I collect the ones that people only half remember, the ones they'd rather not repeat with the lights off, and I sit with them until they make a kind of sense. Tonight's story came to me the way most of them do, quietly, from a man who never meant to speak of it at all. So settle in, and let me tell you about a winter caretaker, a ruined abbey, and a bell that had no business ringing. The man at the center of this story had taken the post the way people take a lot of bad decisions, because it was offered, and because he was tired. He'd been a night porter in the city for years, and he'd grown used to the small hours, to being awake while the rest of the world slept. When the advertisement came for a live-in caretaker at a heritage site out on the North Yorkshire moors, he told the agency it sounded perfect. He said he liked quiet. He would come to understand later that there is quiet, and then there is the thing that pretends to be quiet, and that they are not the same. Greywater Abbey sat in a fold of the moor, miles from the nearest village at the bottom of a valley where two streams met. It had been a working monastery once, centuries ago, before the crown emptied it out and the roof came down, and the monks scattered to wherever monks go when their god stops paying the rent. What was left was a shell, the long bones of a great church open to the sky, a broken cloister running round a square of frozen grass, and a squat stone gatehouse that had somehow kept its roof. The gatehouse was where the caretaker would live. Everything else belonged to the weather and the dead. He arrived in the last light of a December afternoon, and I want you to picture the drive up, because he described it to me more than once. The road ran out about a mile short of the abbey and turned to a rutted track, and the track ran out too, so that the final stretch was on foot with a torch and a duffel bag. The moor on either side was the color of a bruise. There were no trees to speak of, no walls, nothing to break the wind, and the only sound was his own boots and the stream somewhere below, running black under a skin of ice. He came over the last rise, and the abbey was suddenly there beneath him, the way a thing is there when you turn a corner in a dream. The great east window of the ruined church still stood, just the stone tracery, the glass long gone, and the sky behind it had gone the deep bruised violet of a winter dusk. For a moment the whole ruin looked less like a building and more like a rib cage, picked clean and set out on the grass to be looked at. He stood on the rise longer than he needed to. He told me afterward that some part of him already knew, standing there, that he should turn around. He didn't listen to it. Almost nobody ever does. The gatehouse was plain and solid inside, a stove, a narrow bed, a table, a kettle, and on the table a ring of heavy iron keys and a leather logbook left by the caretaker before him. There was a note from the trust that managed the site, welcoming him, listing his duties. Walk the grounds each evening, check the fences, keep the public out after dark, log anything unusual. He read that last line twice and thought nothing of it. It was the sort of thing they put on every list. He lit the stove. He made tea. He unpacked his few things and told himself out loud that it was only an old building and only the wind, and the sound of his own voice in that small stone room was such a thin, small thing that he did not try it again. Outside, the light went out of the valley the way water goes out of a sink, all at once at the end, and the abbey settled into the dark. He sat by the stove and listened to the moor, and for a long while there was nothing to hear at all. That at least was still true on the first night. It would not stay true for long. He slept well enough that first night, and he woke to a hard, bright morning with frost on the inside of the window. For 3 days nothing happened. I want to be honest about that because it matters. The dread in this story is a slow thing, and it earned its slowness. For 3 ordinary days the caretaker walked the frozen grounds, checked the fences, watched a pale sun come and go, and began to think he'd found the easiest work of his life. He took to walking the ruin in the evenings when his duties were done, just to know the shape of the place. He learned the great empty church, where the wind came through the east window and moved the dead grass in slow circles. He learned the chapter house, and the drain of the old kitchens, and the cloister, that square walkway running round the inner court, half its roof fallen, its arches leaning like a mouth of broken teeth. And he learned the tower. The tower stood at the northwest corner, the tallest thing left standing, and it was the one part of the abbey the trust had shut off entirely. The stair inside was gone. The door at its base was boarded and padlocked, and a laminated sign warned that the structure was unsafe and that no one was to enter under any circumstances. Near the top, in a stone frame open to the weather, there hung a single bell. It was green with age streaked white where the birds had marked it, and it had no rope. He looked up at it that third evening and noted, the way you note a small dead fact, that there was no way to ring it. No rope, no wheel, no stair to climb. The bell was simply stranded up there in its frame, a thing that could no longer make a sound. He wrote none of this in the logbook. Why would he? The bell rang for the first time on the fourth night, at 2 in the morning. He came up out of sleep already sitting, his heart going hard, with the last of the sound still hanging in the room. One low stroke of a bell, he was certain he had heard it, the deep iron note of it, close and clear across the frozen valley. He sat in the dark and told himself he had dreamed it, and then it came again. One stroke, slow, unhurried, the kind of ringing a person does when they mean it, when they are calling someone and are willing to wait. He counted. Between the strokes there was a long pause, 30 seconds more, and then the bell again, that same single note rolling out over the moor. He pulled on his boots and his coat over his bedclothes and went out into a cold so hard it felt like being struck, and he stood in the frozen court and looked up at the tower. The bell hung in its frame against the stars. It was not moving. He watched it, and it was perfectly still, and while he watched it, while he was looking directly at it, it rang again, that same low stroke, loud enough to feel in his chest, and the bell in the frame above him did not so much as tremble. He went back inside. He did not sleep. He sat by the cold stove with the logbook open on his knees, and he found that he did not want to write it down, because writing it down would make it a thing that had happened. Toward dawn he turned to the earlier pages, to the neat hand of the caretaker before him, and near the back he found an entry that stopped his breath. It read, in that other man's careful writing, that the bell had rung again in the night again, as though it were ordinary, as though it had happened many times, and under it, a single line. The line said that the bell was not the thing to be afraid of. The bell was only the thing that told you the other one was awake. He closed the book. Outside, the light was coming gray and slow over the moor, and the frost on the grass was turning to water. And for a while, for one more morning, the Abbey was only an old building again, holding its cold in its stones, waiting for the dark to come back. The next day passed in the flat, exhausted calm that comes after a night without sleep. He walked the grounds by daylight, and everything was ordinary and cold and dead, and he told himself the sort of things a reasonable person tells himself. That sound carries strangely on the moor, that an old man alone in a ruin will write strange things in a book. He very nearly believed it. The daylight helps you believe things. The trouble is that the daylight always ends. That evening, he did what the logbook had told him not to be afraid of, and he found the thing it had warned him about. He had gone out at dusk to walk the fences, and his path took him along the edge of the cloister, that square walkway with the broken arches running round the inner court. The light was almost gone, and as he passed the western walk, he saw at the far corner that one of the arches was filled. Where the others framed empty air and the gray grass beyond, that one held a shape, a figure standing under the arch in the deepest of the shadow, facing him. He stopped. His first thought, and I understand this thought, was that a member of the public had got in, a walker, a lost hiker, someone who would need moving on. He raised his torch and called out that the sight was closed. The beam of the torch reached the arch and showed him the fallen stone, the wet moss, the empty grass beyond. It showed him nothing standing there at all. And the moment the light left that corner and swung away, the figure was there again, at the very edge of his sight, exactly where it had been. It was only there when he was not looking at it. It lived in the corner of the eye, in the place the torch could not reach, and he understood in a cold rush that this was a thing that did not want to be seen so much as it wanted to be near. He did not run. He told me that, and he told me he was ashamed of how proud he still was of it. He did not run. He walked stiff, careful, his torch pointed at the ground now, because he had learned already that the light was no use and that looking was worse. He walked the length of the western walk with that shape keeping pace at the edge of his vision, always one arch behind, never closer, never further, matching him step for step in a silence so complete he could hear the small sounds of his own throat. At the end of the walk he stepped out of the cloister onto the open grass, and the presence at the edge of his eye simply was not there anymore. It did not leave. It was there, and then the place where it had been was only empty air, the way a held note ends. He reached the gatehouse and bolted the door, which was a foolish thing to do, and he knew it, because whatever had walked the cloister with him was not the sort of thing a bolt would trouble. He sat with his back to the wall where he could see the whole small room, and he stayed that way until the sky grayed. Somewhere in those hours, he understood the shape of what he'd seen well enough to name one thing about it. It had been facing him the whole time. Through every step of that long walk at the edge of his sight, it had never once turned away. Whatever stood in the cloister of Greywater Abbey, it had been watching him since the moment he came over the rise, and it had been patient, the way only the dead can afford to be. In the morning he did what he should have done on the first day. He decided to find out whose ruin he was living in, and who had lived in it before him, and why the trust could never seem to keep a caretaker through a full winter. That decision was the closest thing to sense he showed in the whole affair, and I'll give him credit for it, even knowing where it led. He started with the logbook and read it properly this time, front to back in the cold light of the gatehouse. It went back years, through a dozen different hands, and the pattern in it was the sort of thing you only see when you stop pretending not to. Every caretaker, sooner or later, wrote about the bell. Every one of them, after the bell, wrote about the cloister. The words were different, but the shape was always the same, the ringing in the night, the figure in the western walk, the sense of being watched, of being waited for. And every account, without fail, stopped. The entries would run for weeks, and then break off mid-season, mid-page, and a new hand would begin months later with no explanation of where the last one had gone. Nobody wrote a goodbye. They simply ended, one after another, and the Abbey took on a new keeper and began again. There was a phone in the gatehouse, an old thing wired to a line that mostly worked, and he used it to call the Trust's regional office. He asked, carefully, about the history of the site and about the man before him. The woman on the line was kind and vague and clearly reading from very little. She confirmed the previous caretaker had left without notice in the spring. She could tell him nothing else, except, and she offered this the way people offer the one interesting thing they know, that if he wanted the real history of Greywater, he should speak to the old verger down in the village, a man who had looked after the church there for 50 years and who knew the Moor better than anyone living. He drove down the next afternoon. The verger was very old and lived in a low cottage full of the smell of coal smoke, and when the caretaker said the name of the Abbey, the old man went quiet for a while before he spoke. What he told him, over the course of an hour, I'll give you as it was given to me. The old man said that Greywater had been a house of monks who kept the night office, who rose in the black middle of every night at the coldest, deadest hour to go into the church and pray while the rest of the world slept. He said that when the Abbey was destroyed and the brothers turned out, one of them would not go. An old monk, the bell ringer, who had kept the night office his whole life. The old verger said the story handed down was that the man had gone up into the tower to ring the brothers to prayer one last time, on the night the roof came down, and that he had never come out of it. They never found him. And every soul who had kept that ruin since, the verger said, had heard his bell. The caretaker asked the only question that mattered. He asked what the old monk wanted, and the verger looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at someone you've already decided not to see again, and he said that the dead who keep to a duty are not looking to be freed of it. They are looking for someone to take their turn. He said the old monk had rung the night office alone for 400 years, and that he was tired, and that he was patient, and that he was, above all things, still waiting for the one brother who never came to relieve him. Then the old man said he was tired himself, and showed the caretaker to the door, and did not wish him luck. He drove back up onto the moor as the light was failing, and the abbey came into view below him, gray in the last of the day. He understood now what the logbook had meant, and what the cloister had wanted, and how patient it had learned to be. And he understood, sitting there in the cold car above the valley, that the coldest hour of the night, the hour the old monks had risen to pray, was still to come. He should have driven away. I have to say it plainly because he said it to me plainly more than once in the flat voice of a man who has gone over a single decision 10,000 times. The car was right there. The road was open. He had everything he owned in one bag in the gatehouse, and nothing at Greywater was worth a single hour more of his life. And he stayed. He told himself he stayed to see it through, to understand it, but I think the truth is simpler and worse. I think, by then, it had already decided he was the one, and part of him had begun to agree. He did not sleep. He sat up in the gatehouse with every light burning and waited for the coldest hour, because he knew now that it would come for the night office, and he wanted, God help him, to be awake to meet it. The bell rang at 2, that single low stroke rolling out across the frozen valley, and this time he did not flinch. He put on his coat and he went out into the dark, and he walked toward the cloister, because that was where it waited, and because some part of him had stopped being able to do anything else. The moon was up and hard and white, and it lit the inner court like a stage. He came to the edge of the cloister and stopped, and this time he did not raise the torch because he had learned. He simply let his eyes go soft and unfocused, and he let it be there. And it was there in the western walk under the same arch, the shape of a man in a long habit with the hood up and the face lost in the dark of it, standing perfectly still. Only now it was not at the edge of his sight. Now when he looked, it stayed. Whatever agreement had held it to the corner of the eye had ended, and it let itself be seen, and that was the most frightening thing of the whole affair, that the moment it was ready, it simply stepped into being looked at and was not troubled at all. The bell rang again, though nothing moved in the tower, and the figure lifted its head. He could not see a face inside the hood, and he was glad of it, and he has told me that the not seeing is the thing that visits him now, the black oval where a face should have been. And then it spoke to him, though I should be careful with that word, because he said there was no voice, no sound at all, only the words arriving in him fully formed, cold and quiet and terribly reasonable. It told him that the hour had come, and that the office must be kept, and that he had only to come and take his turn, and that then the old brother could rest at last. It did not threaten him. That was the horror of it. It asked him the way you would ask a tired man to sit down. And he felt himself want to. That is the part he can never quite say without stopping. He felt the pull of it, the deep, bone-level longing to walk across that frozen court and into the black doorway of the tower, and up a stair that no longer existed, to take the rope that no longer hung there and ring the brothers to a prayer that no one had said in 400 years. It felt like rest. It felt like the end of being cold. He took one step toward it across the moonlit grass, and then another, and the figure in the arch did not move to meet him, only waited, patient as stone, as it had waited for everyone before him. What stopped him in the end was not courage, and it was not faith. It was the logbook. In that last moment, some small, stubborn clerk in the back of his mind put up the single fact it had been holding all along, that every hand in that book had ended mid-page, that not one of them had ever written a final line, that whatever took his turn from him would take everything else as well and leave no goodbye. He understood, one step from the tower, that to keep the office was to end, exactly as they had all ended, and to become the next patient thing in the arch, waiting on the caretaker after him. And with the last of whatever was still his own, he turned his back on it and he walked, not ran. He was past running back across the court toward the gatehouse, with the cold pull of it dragging at his spine the whole way and the black doorway of the tower at his back, open, waiting, and when he finally looked, empty. He left Greywater Abbey in the grey of that morning on foot, down the rutted track to the car, and he did not walk the grounds one last time, and he did not close the logbook, and he did not lock the gatehouse door. He drove until the Moor was gone from his mirror and did not stop for a long time. He never went back. The trust, I imagine, found a new caretaker by the spring. They always do. I've thought a good deal about why he agreed to tell me all of this, and I think it comes down to the one part he cannot leave alone. It is not the bell, and it is not the figure in the cloister, and it is not even the black hollow where a face should have been. It is the wanting. He cannot forgive himself for how close he came, and how good it felt, and how much of him still, on the worst nights, wishes he had taken that last step and finally been warm. Because the old monk is still up there. The office is still unkept, and a thing that has waited 400 years for the one brother who never came is not troubled by losing one more. It is only patient. It is still awake. And somewhere out on that moor tonight, the bell that cannot ring is ringing, slow and low across the frozen dark, calling for someone to come and take a turn that never ends. That's where I'll leave him and leave you with a warm room, I hope, and a door you can lock, and no cold coming up through the floor. Some duties are a mercy to walk away from. Not everyone who is offered one is strong enough, or tired enough, or lucky enough to say no. If this is the kind of story you'd sit up in the dark for, then do me a kindness before you go, like, share, and subscribe, so the next tale finds you when the hour comes round again. Sleep well if you can, keep the light on if you'd rather, and if you ever wake in the coldest hour to a single low bell rolling in from somewhere it has no business coming from, do the wise thing. Don't get up, don't go and see, and whatever it asks of you, however gently, however tired you are, don't take the turn. Good night.